And today we are going to talk about a very interesting question of which not much is known, but is always running somewhere in our lives, especially also in Asia, but also in other countries or continents like Africa and also America. And that topic is imperialism. And it seems to me that you know a lot about it. So we wanted to talk about some imperialism, how it is in Asia, um,
Mhm.
the effects of imperialism. A lot of times, then I hear people say, "But we don't own colonies there anymore. So why are they complaining?" Could you maybe enlighten us that maybe the effects of all that imperialism is still actually very much going on in the lives of the people that still live there?
Yeah, okay. So I think this is a really interesting question because you're so right to say that there's so much confusion around the term imperialism. People don't understand that we're still living in a world that is very much ruled by imperialism, and it's purposeful. There's a reason why we're so confused. There's a reason why it's obscured, and I think. First of all, to sort of define what imperialism is, I
Yeah.
would say, and I would just caveat this by saying I'm not an academic in this region. I'm not a historian or academic. I started my podcast Empire Watch because I realized this misunderstanding about imperialism. And I initially started my YouTube channel with the co-founder of No Cold War. It's a campaign against the new Cold War, or really the continuing Cold War that we're currently having. And we can sort of look at the Cold War as this the fight between imperialism and communism or socialism. You can kind of see the Cold War in through that lens, and it's still sort of ongoing till now. It's just that imperialism won so well and basically won that the divisions became a little bit less clear as socialism or communism seemed to decline. So it sort of like disappeared in many people's consciousness. But now that's sort of changing with the rise of China. So it's a really interesting time that we're having. But basically, so the way that I like to think of imperialism in a very, very simple way is if we think about it as the highest stage of capitalism, and I like to think of it as what is the goal of capitalism, and therefore what is the goal of imperialism. So capitalism, the goal of capitalism is the continual accumulation of wealth. Like the you have to accumulate more and more capital. That's like the main goal of capitalism. So the metrics of success is just more and more and more accumulation of capital. It requires a growth aspect of the continuation accumulation of capital. And therefore, it sort of makes sense that imperialism happens because that would be the natural progression from accumulating more and more capital. You have to sort of expand out of the borders of your country. And I would say too, that's accumulation for capital for a very select amount of people. Because if the only metrics for success is more and more capital, then inevitably it's at the expense of the people around you. It's the expense of the periphery. It's the expense of the world. But that group of capitalists, the capitalist class, gets smaller and smaller and smaller just through the driving force of the logic of capitalism. So imperialism is the inevitable outgrowth of capitalism. I kind of think of it that way. And then, well, that's the goal of imperialism, right? And then really imperialism or capitalism is the system that allows that accumulation, a continual accumulation of wealth to happen. And that's where it gets really confusing and complicated because and the how is so complicated because it's like, really, capitalism or imperialism is a completely irrational ideology. It's like completely irrational to think that a small group of people should hoard more and more wealth at the expense of the vast majority of the rest of the world. Like, so I think that because it's such an unnatural state, the system that keeps it in place requires so much coercive control. So it requires things like military, it requires financial control, it requires political control, it requires all sorts of different mechanisms to keep that system in place. So that's where it gets very, very confusing. But I think if we think of it kind of like in that way as to what the driving force of imperialism is, then everything that comes out of that gets a little bit clearer. I don't know if I'm making it more clear. I don't know if I'm making it clearer.